there are people who've been saying for many years that the level of DNA in these vaccines is innocuous. But science has well established there are several problems with this DNA. So when we manufacture a vaccine using a cell, the final product is contaminated with fragments of DNA from the cell. If the cell is an animal, we have an immune response to it and we eliminate it, right? If the DNA is from a human, it can insert into stem cells and cause mutations. And it can also activate an immune receptor called toll-like receptor 9. But everyone says, oh, the levels are too low. So I've been looking really since 2009 for exactly what levels of fetal DNA would activate the toll-like receptor 9. And my searches weren't pulling anything out for me. And it was in January of this year, I was reading in the oncology field, and the field of cancer is trying to activate toll-like receptor 9 to get a cancer-killing immune response. And they referenced these papers on pregnancy and how pregnancy is actually labor is actually triggered or induced. And what happens is as the baby matures and is going to come to term, the placenta breaks down, all right, because it's been used up. Yep. And fetal DNA fragments from the baby can then cross into the mother's bloodstream. And when they reach levels that are, it's an amount, 0.22 nanograms per mil and above, they activate toll-like receptor 9. And they activate dendritic cells and T cells that release all of these cytokines that could cause a cytokine storm. And they activate B lymphocytes, and antibodies are made to the fetal DNA. And then what happens is those antibodies circulate through the mom, and when they see the baby, they recognize it as and have an autoimmune attack against it because they've made antibodies to the fetal DNA. And that's what triggers labor, this massive immune rejection of the baby.
Wow. So really the body, the mother's body at the correct time, when there's a breakdown placenta, then rejects the body, like forces it out as an immune response.
Yes, and if the levels of the fetal DNA in the mom's blood rise too early, you have a miscarriage.
Fascinating.
And if her placenta is really healthy and they don't rise, labor's not induced, and you have induction or a C-section.
Interesting. What is a toll-like receptor?
So a toll-like receptor, there are 13 known family members in humans and mice. And they are to respond to pathogens, bacteria, and viruses. And the different numbers, they respond to different kinds of things. So toll-like receptor 9 responds to either a single strand or a double strand. So most people know about the genome, the double helix, right? You can kind of cut down the middle of it and you'll have a single strand. Fragments of what's called primitive or undermethylated DNA. Okay. So a virus is undermethylated. It has less methyl groups decorating its DNA than an adult would. And fetal DNA is also undermethylated. And that's why those are really good activators of the toll-like receptor 9. Okay. Right.
And then I assume the other ones in the family look at different reactions.
RNA activates toll-like receptor 7, right? And some recognize bacteria. Yeah, so there.
All right, that's about as far as we'll go because we're already getting past like what my brain can handle.
Right. But that's another important thing to point out is when you have a DNA virus, like chickenpox is a DNA virus, and you give the person a vaccine, right? That's how the vaccine works. Fragments of the DNA activate toll-like receptor 9, and immunity arises.
Wow. Toll-like receptors, super fascinating. So now what does this have to do? So the body induces labor once there's a certain amount of floating fragments of the baby's DNA from the placenta. Body says, oh my God, creates antibodies. Those antibodies see the baby, reject it from the body. That's labor. What does this have to do with vaccinations we're giving our children?
So the amount of DNA that's important here is the amount in the blood, right? Mm-hmm. So, a mom has 5 to 6 liters of blood. A baby at the age that we're giving them these vaccines has between a half to 1 liter. So chickenpox, we know from Merck, it's in their summary statement for approval, is contaminated with 2 micrograms of fetal DNA.
Okay.
All right? That is well beyond 0.22 nanograms per mil. So 2 micrograms is injected in the child. That's 2,000 nanograms. They have half a liter of blood, up to 20 nanograms per mil. That's an awful lot.
Right, a lot.
We know anything over 0.22 is going to activate that receptor. So from the dendritic cells and the T cells, you're going to have a massive cytokine outpouring, which that can cause multi-organ failure.
So explain cytokine storms, cytokine.
So cytokine storm, we call it cytokine release syndrome also. It happens when your immune system is overactivated too rapidly. And all the cells spill out the components that they normally would spill out more slowly over time to try to kill the pathogen. So these are killer molecules, the cytokines.
Right.
They're supposed to cause damage and make holes in cell membranes. And when you release so much at once, you get bystander damage, civilian casualties, you get collateral damage.
Like it just starts wiping out. You don't have a specific target. You wipe out the village and towns nearby. Innocent cells die, and you start having real problems inside the body.
Yes, and vaccine manufacturers have never measured cytokine levels in children.
All right, so this massive, very high levels of DNA fragments in the blood of this baby we've just given the vaccination. And so what you're saying is labor is
that's a massive immune
massive
response.
event. It's a massive immune response. I've gone through my wife 3 times now. It's an amazing event to watch that take place. And what you're saying is what's inducing that event, what's causing that event is the T9 receptor coming in contact with this immune response. And it's even more in a little baby, or at least as much as?
No, we don't have to give the baby as much because it's the amount in their blood.
Right. So, but blood
level. His blood volume is
right.
much lower. Their blood levels are much higher than the levels that are required to trigger labor and delivery.
Okay.
And so you're going to have that massive cytokine release. We know that.
Okay.
Right? And anyone who says that the contaminants in these vaccines are innocuous either doesn't know anything about immunology and vaccines, how they work, or they're not telling the truth. We're also going to have antibodies made to that, right? And we know, because of all the biologic drugs that we put out to the market, that you can have something that's really close but not quite self. You'll mount an immune response to it, and then it will self-attack because the immune response, it doesn't recognize like one single point. It recognizes like a piece of something. And so maybe what's different from the fetal DNA to the child's DNA is one point, but the antibody actually reacts to like this segment.
Right.
And that segment is going to be found in the child. Our DNA is so similar. And it could cause a massive autoimmune attack on the brain during brain remodeling. And that occurs sometime between birth and about 3 years, maybe some kids a little later. we're born with a lot more nerve cells than we die with, and 70%, 90% die off very, very rapidly. And as they're dying so rapidly, the DNA is exposed that's not normally exposed. We also know from published literature, and again, I've been talking about this for a while, let's put the numbers back out there. I think we're getting people's attention.
Yeah.
That when we give mice injected into their blood fragments of DNA, 100% of those mice take that DNA up into the stem cells in their bone marrow.
And then
And it's at levels lower than the concentrations that children are getting when they're injected with these fetal manufactured vaccines.